King Edward VII met a tragic and agonizing end on the 6th of May 1910 within the confines of Buckingham Palace. Despite his reign lasting over 9 years, his lifestyle choices were far from healthy. As the successor to Queen Victoria's throne following her lengthy reign and subsequent passing, he had been the Prince of Wales for nearly 6 decades. Throughout his life he indulged in the high society circles, frequently visiting country estates on weekends for extravagant parties, earning him a reputation as a playboy prince with numerous mistresses. However, the consequences of his lifestyle choices caught up with him, and at the age of 68, the King and Emperor of India suffered a grueling demise. What exactly led to the King's death, and what were the contributing factors? Upon Queen Victoria's death, Edward ascended the throne as the King of the United Kingdom and Emperor of India, ruling over the British dominions. He opted to reign under the name Edward VII, choosing not to tarnish his father's name out of respect. His coronation was scheduled for the 26th of June 1902, but at that time the King's health was ailing. In his late 50s, just 2 days prior to the coronation, he was diagnosed with a condition that could have contributed to his eventual death. Appendicitis, a perilous ailment in those days, when surgery lacked modern advancements, posed a significant threat to his life. The surgical procedure to remove the appendix was far from foolproof, carrying a considerable risk. Despite being the king, he had yet to be crowned, and there was a chance that Edward VII might not survive. Fortunately, renowned surgeon Sir Frederick Trevors and antiseptic pioneer Lord Lister successfully performed a life-saving operation on the king, draining a pint of pus from the infected abscess on his appendix. The procedure involved a small incision of around 4.5 inches through the king's tissue and abdominal wall. One fortunate aspect was that the surgeons determined it was not cancerous, and the day after the surgery the king was sitting up in bed smoking a cigar, and within 2 weeks he was deemed out of danger and his surgeons were richly rewarded. Edward VII was eventually crowned around 5 weeks later on the 9th of August 1902. As a monarch, Edward VII took pleasure in his role within the British society and international politics. He relished the elaborate costumes and ceremonial events in which he regularly participated. He was considered a trendsetter, popularizing tweeds, dinner jackets, and a particular style of hat during this time. However, he also had a penchant for a wilder lifestyle, and known for his extravagant breakfast consisting of an assortment of lavish foods, he indulged in opulent banquets each morning. Additionally, he maintained a series of mistresses throughout his life, indicating a strong affinity for female companionship. He famously referred to his wife as his brood mare, while regarding his mistresses as his hacks. During a wordplay on a previous monarch's name, he earned the moniker Edward the Caresser. His relationship with his mother, Queen Victoria, was often strained as she disapproved of his behaviour and choices. Despite his initial health scare and controversial personal life, King Edward VII managed to reign with enthusiasm and impact. His contributions as a peacemaker and his efforts to modernise the military remain notable, even though his reign was relatively short-lived. Edward VII's death marked the end of an era and the commencement of the King George V's reign. Although his lifestyle choices ultimately played a role in his demise, his legacy as a monarch endures. He frequently clashed with his mother during her reign as queen, and she disapproved of his behaviour and numerous mistresses, which starkly contrasted the loyal nature of his father, Prince Albert. Victoria also held Edward responsible for her husband's death, as Albert had been travelling to confront him about his mistresses and philandering. It was during this journey that Albert fell ill with a cold from which he would never recover, and during his coronation, medical personnel were present to assist Edward VII in fulfilling his duties. Still in recovery from surgery, he was unable to perform certain traditional rituals that had been part of the ceremony for centuries. Throughout his life, Edward VII was an avid smoker, consuming 20 cigarettes and 12 cigars every day. He also suffered from a radial ulcer, a form of cancer near his nose, which was treated with radium in 1907. As his final years approached, he visibly struggled with bronchitis, exacerbated by his heavy smoking habit. In February 1909, while on a state visit in Germany, Edward experienced a momentary loss of consciousness, causing widespread panic. And despite this episode, he carried on. However, in March 1910, while in France, he collapsed once again, and it became evident to many that Edward VII was gravely ill and likely had little time left. He stayed in France for a period to recover, but the true extent of the king's deteriorating health remained concealed. Some in England criticised him for remaining in France as a political crisis unfolded back home. 6 weeks later, he made the journey back to Buckingham Palace, still suffering from severe bronchitis. His wife and consort Alexandra of Denmark had been visiting her brother, the King of Greece, in Corfu, and upon her return on the 6th of May 1910, Edward VII, while recovering in the palace, experienced several severe heart attacks. The royal doctors urged him to rest and recover, but the king defiantly replied, "No, I shall not give in. I shall go on. I shall work until the end." Aware that his death was imminent, he drifted in and out of consciousness, and his son, the Prince of Wales, visited him at the time and informed him that the king's horse, named the Witch of the Air, had won a race at Kempton that afternoon. Edward responded, "Yes, I have heard of it. I am very glad," which is considered his final words. He lost consciousness for the last time and was put to bed. 15 minutes later, the royal doctors pronounced the passing of Edward VII, aged 68, inside Buckingham Palace, the very place of his birth. Alexandra, the king's wife, plunged into deep mourning and refused to allow her husband's body to be moved. However, she permitted small groups of visitors to pay their respects, and on the 11th of May, the king was dressed in his uniform and placed inside a grand oak coffin. 8 days after his demise, the coffin was transferred to the throne room, sealed and placed on public display as part of the lying in state tradition. In each corner of the casket, a guardsman stood vigilantly, overseeing the body, while King George V had already ascended to the throne. The preparations for the funeral were already in progress, and upon seeing her husband's remains, Alexandra remarked on their remarkable preservation. It was observed that the king appeared peacefully asleep. On the morning of 17th of May, the casket containing Edward VII's body was placed upon a gun carriage, drawn by sombre black horses, and solemnly transported to Westminster Hall. The new king, accompanied by the royal family and Edward's beloved terrier Caesar, walked behind the carriage. A brief service took place, after which the royal family departed, and the doors of Westminster Hall were opened, allowing a staggering 400,000 individuals to pass by and pay their respects to the late king. The funeral ceremony was held on the 20th of May 1910, and it was hailed as the grandest gathering of royalty and nobility ever assembled in one place, and of its kind the last. A royal train carried the king's casket from London to Windsor Castle, where he was laid to rest within St. George's Chapel, alongside many other monarchs. Despite his relatively short reign, spanning less than a decade, King Edward VII was revered as a peacemaker, harbouring concerns that his nephew, the German Emperor, would propel Europe into a devastating war. 4 years after Edward's passing, World War I erupted, and the efforts he had made in reorganizing the armed forces and navy proved invaluable during the conflict. As a monarch, he surpassed expectations, yet his accession occurred when he was already beyond the average life expectancy, leaving little time for him to fully establish his reign. However, he took great care to ensure that his successor, George V, would be better prepared for the task. The king's health had been ailing, plagued by lung and appendix issues, and while pneumonia was officially attributed as the cause of his demise, it was evident that his lifestyle choices had taken a toll on his well-being. Known for his lavish parties, heavy smoking, and multiple mistresses, these factors, coupled with his pre-existing health conditions, ultimately contributed to his passing. The death of King Edward VII marked the conclusion of an era and the dawn of a new reign under King George V, and his legacy as a peacemaker and his endeavours to modernise the military continue to be remembered, despite the brevity of his time on the throne. Please continue to support my channel by subscribing.